We just heard an amazing speech from Mr. Potter. And can you tell us, just in a nutshell for those watching on live stream, kind of what's the biggest takeaway that you want to share with people who maybe don't know anything about what you do, or what's the best way to eat and sleep?
So in a sentence, the biggest takeaway is that if you can understand the best time of day at which to do things according to your own biological clock, then you can optimize your health and performance. And my talk today covered a few different things, from the best times of day at which to eat, to the best times of day at which to do certain types of work, and the best times of day at which to exercise.
So if we break down some myths a bit, is there such a thing as like night people and day people, or how does it work in line with what you're saying?
There is, and what you're referring to there is this construct of chronotype. So you have morning larks and night owls, and at the extremes, there are quite big differences between these people. So some people who aren't shift workers prefer to go to bed at 7 p.m, and others prefer to get up or go to bed at 7 a.m.
Okay.
But much of this is because we live in modern environments that don't give us strong time cues, which are the time cues that synchronize our body's clocks each day. And what you find is that when people go camping, for example, and they're exposed to very strong time cues, they only get natural light during the day and night. So during the day, they're spending lots of time outdoors in the sun, and at night, they've just got the campfire, the stars, and the moon. Then after a few days, the difference between the earliest people and the latest people is dramatically smaller.
Okay.
So what we can learn from that is that, yes, there is a genetic basis of chronotype, but the reason for these big differences between people is that lots of people aren't spending enough time outside during the day, and they're exposed to artificial light pollution at night, and also they're sedentary during the day, and they're consuming food at night. And all those different things conspire to disrupt our body's clocks and thereby worsen our health and performance.
So is it kind of evolutionary, like the way our sleep and work patterns are nowadays optimized, or is it different now when we have like artificial environments where we're not necessarily with the sun rising and setting? Or
Yeah, exactly. And I think that as a general heuristic, it makes sense to consider our lifestyles in the context of the history of our species. And sometimes in the 21st century, that means being a bit strange and different to other people. But the principles are the same for all people. You want to eat whole, unprocessed food during the day, and you want to synchronize that with your physical activity, because we would have had to be physically active to hunt and gather food during the day, for example. And then at night, you want to do what you can to reduce your exposure to artificial light. So that might be wearing blue blocking glasses in the build up to bedtime. It might be dimming your devices around the time at which the sun goes down. It could be using apps such as f.lux that filter blue light from your screens when the sun goes down. It might be using blackout blinds in your bedroom and so on. And if you can do those things that mimic the environments in which we evolved, then you're likely to benefit.
so are you saying it's important to try to get as natural, like as close to nature as possible?
Yes. The consideration here, though, is that many people live at high latitudes.
Okay.
And of course, if you look at the North Pole and the South Pole, respectively, at certain times of year, then you can have pretty much constant darkness or constant light exposure.
True.
And that could be a problem. So I wouldn't recommend that those people spend all their time outside during daylight during the summer, and all their time outside in winter, because it's just constantly going to be dark. So I think that it's possible to actually be more healthy now in some parts of the world than it once was. But the important thing is to be very consistent in the times at which you do these things, although occasional departures from those regular, consistent behaviors is unlikely to be a negative thing.
Okay, so that tradition we have of telling that kids need routines, that's actually true? Or
If we treated adults like kids, a lot of people would probably benefit. Maybe be slightly less patronizing though.
what about, is there an optimal time to work, per se? Like if we think of, okay, I only want to work 4 hours a day, or a lot of people want to optimize their time, work less, millennials, it's the big trend now.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I don't feel that it's possible to give you a very definitive answer at the moment. But what I suggested in my talk was that for most people, it probably makes sense to place the most cognitively demanding work relatively early in the waking day. And that's because of several reasons. So one is simply that the longer that we've been awake each day, the worse attention seems to be for most people. Maybe not for everyone, but certainly for most people. Another is that as the day goes on, we have to make more and more decisions. And there's some evidence, although it's not very convincing, that we deplete our willpower over time. So what that can mean is that we end up making very poor decisions after we've had to make lots of decisions previously. And then also there are other considerations. So one, for example, is that if you're doing high intensity exercise, then it's probably best placed slightly late in the biological day. And so if you want to be physically active too, and you want to optimize your exercise timing, then it probably makes sense to work other things around it. And that's one more reason that placing knowledge work relatively early in the day makes sense. But there are also considerations such as chronotype here. So many night owls need to use alarm clocks to wake up in the morning. Okay. And maybe it takes them 3 hours after waking up to feel human again. And if that's the case, then they probably shouldn't be doing very cognitively taxing work in those 3 hours. They should wait a little bit before getting to that work. Whereas if you're an early bird, you might spring out of bed in the morning and feel good to go straight away. Yeah. So it's modified by chronotype too.
And what about eating? Is there like, you shouldn't eat so close to bed, or good to eat a warrior breakfast in the morning, or how does it?
Yeah. Historically, people have said things like finish breakfast by 7 p.m. or whatever. And that doesn't make sense because we're so different in our chronotypes. But if we think about the timing of our eating relative to our sleep-wake cycles, then we can start to get at more personalized recommendations. And I think it's important for people to stop consuming calories each day by at least 2 hours before bedtime. Because if you eat too close to bed, then first you might be eating during your biological nighttime, at which time of day your body's not so well set to digest and metabolize that food. And also the food that you eat will be partitioned less favorably. It's more likely to be stored as fat mass, and your blood sugar responses to meals will be worse and so on. But another is that when you eat, your body temperature goes up because your body has to break down the food. Okay. If your temperature goes up, then you're going to find it harder to fall asleep at night. So it's likely to disrupt your sleep too. So as a rule of thumb, I suggested that people wait at least half an hour after their habitual wake time each day to consume their first calories, and then to finish them by at least 2 hours before bedtime. And if anything, there's quite a strong body of evidence now showing that concentrating lots of calories and carbohydrates early in the day, so having a very big breakfast, a small lunch, and a small dinner, seems to be good for metabolic health.
Very interesting. So no more night snacks for any of you.
There you go.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
So the one other thing I would mention is that it seems to be important to optimize timing of exercise too. And the best time to do endurance training, so long runs or bike rides, is quite dependent on the person. It's hard to be prescriptive with that type of exercise. But for strength and power exercise, lifting weights, for example, that type of exercise seems to be best placed in the late biological afternoon, which for most people is probably around 5 or 6 p.m., which coincides nicely with most people's working days, which is ideal. And for other types of exercise, it depends on the goals, but if you're doing high-intensity intermittent exercise to improve your blood sugar regulation, if you have type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, then it's probably best to do that type of exercise in the late biological afternoon too. So that's the other thing that I would add.
And you were talking about naps also?
Yeah, touched on naps.
Is it like, what's the optimal amount of time to have a power nap?
Yeah, it depends on what you want from that nap.
Okay.
But if you want a short-term boost in alertness, which is what most people want, then a 10-minute nap is probably best. Okay. So that will have the greatest impact on immediate alertness after the nap. If you have a longer nap that contains some deep sleep, so let's say you had a half-hour nap, Then after you wake from the nap, you might feel a bit groggy initially,
Okay.
but then later in the day, you'll have a greater boost in alertness from that longer nap.
If you have a 10-minute nap.
If you have a longer nap. Yeah. Okay. So short-term boost in alertness, 10-minute nap's great. If you want a double whammy of a boost in alertness, what you can do is you can have a coffee nap or a caffeine nap.
Okay.
Where you have some caffeine and then you immediately have the nap afterwards. And because the caffeine hasn't kicked in yet, it won't interfere with the nap. And then when you come out of the nap, you've got a double increase in alertness from the nap, but then also from the caffeine antagonizing adenosine receptors and thereby blocking the sleep promoting signal that accumulates in our bodies with prolonged wakefulness.
Is there an optimal time for that caffeine nap? Like 20 minutes or?
Same guidelines apply, so 10 minutes is probably about right.
Is it that caffeine doesn't work in your body when you're sleeping?
It's just that it hasn't reached a significant concentration in your bloodstream yet, so it won't interfere with the sleep. So you might, for example, have a strong coffee, immediately take the nap, set your alarm, 10-minute nap, wake up from the nap, and then you should have a nice jolt in alertness afterwards.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.